everyone. Welcome to Adoption, the Making of Me, Oral Histories of Adoptee Stories. My name is Damon Davis, and I am an adoptee. I'm also the host of the Who Am I Really podcast. And I was a guest on season 1 of the podcast that Sarah and Louise have put together that brings you here today. So I think we can all agree that they've come a long way since season 1 of their show. Am I right? For right now, I want to make sure that we give a warm welcome to their guests. But before we do that, they, Sarah and Louise, would like to make sure to thank Jeff Leventhal and the S12F crew for all of the support for everything that they do. So now I would like to welcome Sarah Reinhardt, Louise Brown, and their guest for today for the podcast, Mr. Michael Coffey. Now I got to read you a little bit about Michael. Michael is a prolific writer, a poet, and a former co-editorial director for Publishers Weekly. It's a magazine that's focused on the publishing industry. He's also an adoptee, and his current book is here for sale, back on the table. It's called Becketts Children, a literary memoir. So I would love to welcome Michael, Sarah, and Louise for today's live podcast interview.
Hello.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you want to clarify the?
Go ahead.
But just you've put your names in a jar. There's 12 books. We're going to give away 12 books of Michael's at the end of the night by pulling whoever name comes out. That was a long way of saying. We'll do a drawing.
Welcome. So, Michael, we're all excited. You're about to sing us a little Neil Young Harvest Moon. This was last night's joke.
Yes.
We know Michael because of our dear friend A.M. Holmes, the author. Your dear friend A.M. Holmes. A.M. wrote The Mistress's Daughter, for those of you that don't know, which is a big book in the adoptee world. She's also written many other beautiful works. But your work, let's focus on that. Becketts Children. I'm into poetry, the prose. Sarah and I discussed it last night, that it's beautiful. It weaves in a lot with your story that we'll hear about later. Sarah? Oops.
I'm so sorry. I put it on airplane mode, and who knows?
Nice turn off your cell phone.
I did. Okay.
Sarah.
Michael.
Yes.
To add to that, we met you in person in February in New York, and we had our Adoption, the Making of Me happy hour. There was like 80 people there. Also, let me just be clear, they were also there for Liz DeBetta and Reckoning with the Primal Wound. Jeff put that on as well. When you walked in, I could see your face, and you said something that has stuck with me, which is you felt a palpable heaviness in the room. Could you expound upon that?
Well, I'd never been in a room full of adoptees until that night, and it was as if everyone was waiting for me. And of course, that's just purely imagined. But it was just, I was greeted with this sense of expectation. That was probably all of my projection. But people were also rather furtive and not exactly trusting at first until you got into their circle and people just opened up. It was really a wonderful event, I thought. I was really left quite moved by the whole thing. I had to run out at some point.
Right, because it was a lot, right?
Yeah.
How did you feel last night in a smaller group of adoptees?
I was very impressed by how friendly everyone was and how, of the stories I was able to sample, every story is different in some way. And as I was saying, I think to Jeff earlier, it would be interesting if someone could extract what is common for all of us. Is there something in common? And what would that be?
We have spent years talking to people and think we have some idea of what that is.
So, well, speaking of your story, on the podcast, many of you have been on, we don't always know the story beforehand. We like not to know the story beforehand so that it's authentic. And we really don't know much about yours besides what's woven into your book. So
Yeah.
we'd like to hear your story, how you'd like to tell it.
Okay.
Yeah, and please tell us how you've woven in your book into your personal narrative?
Well, first of all, I'll just start with, my story. I was born in New York City at St. Vincent's Hospital in 1954. And I was put up for adoption immediately, and it was handled by the New York Foundling Hospital, which is probably the oldest adoption agency in the country. Started in, I think, 1869 by 3 Irish nuns, Sisters of Charity. They had a brownstone on East 12th Street, and one night they put out an empty cradle. And in the morning, there was a small infant there, and that started the founding. Little baby Sarah, actually. They're still active in New York, and I try to help them out when I can. So I was, in about 3 weeks, they rushed me across the street to get it baptized into the Catholic Church on Lexington Avenue. And my parents, my adoptive parents, were in upstate New York, and my mother could not have children. She had a hysterectomy. So through their parish priest, their application got down to the New York Foundling, and they were invited to come and look at me. And in 5 weeks or so, at the age of 5 weeks, I was taken upstate New York in a big snowstorm in an old Packard, as I'm told. Don't remember anything about it. But and I went on to have quite an idyllic childhood. I was raised in a very small Adirondack mountain town where everyone knew everyone. And my father's family had been there for, generations. And I walked to school, and there was a little general store, and there was a brook and a river that we swam in, and it was just ideal in a way. There were no siblings in the family. I was an only child, and felt special. It seemed to me everyone treated me with a certain deference, as if I was different, and kind of privileged. I don't think I imagined it all, but that's sort of the stigma of being adopted, except that's the positive side of it. My parents didn't know much about my birth mother or my birth father, very little. They did have a sense that my birth parents were better educated than they were. My father was a corrections officer in a state prison and didn't graduate from high school. My mother was a registered nurse in Plattsburgh, New York.
Michael, how did they have that sense? They were told by social workers or by the nuns, or
things leaked out, I think, in their meetings down in New York with the New York Foundling. The sisters were very guarded, but they let certain things out, just to say, well, he seems to be from a good family, or they are from the Northeast United States, and both were college educated. Maybe that was trying to sell them on me. I don't know. But unfortunately, they felt, I think, that they should just stay out of my way because I was from better stock. I mean, it's kind of...
What do you mean by that they felt they should stay out of your way?
That I was different than everyone else in town, and that I could make my own decisions. And they weren't going to sort of impose their small town vision on me and, have me just try to become a land surveyor or work at the local pharmacy or something like that.
Did you feel close to your parents, like in a part of them? Or did you feel a little bit...
I felt different.
You felt different.
I felt different. I didn't think I looked like anyone. Where, I was surrounded by big families where everyone was just a little bit of an altered copy of the other one. And they looked like their uncles, and there's long family lines of people who looked alike. And I looked like no one else there, it seemed to me.
Sounds lonely.
It was liberating, to tell you the truth. I didn't feel lonely. I felt that I could be whoever I wanted to be, within limits. I didn't play professional baseball for the youth. Not yet, yeah. So, I felt that the world was my oyster in a way. And I think that has come back to haunt me in a way, that I didn't have a stronger parental hand Because I went on to make lots of wonderful, decisions, and went into a good college, and I studied and got good grades and so on. But as soon as college years were over, I started to make terrible decisions. It's only in the last few years that I've begun to realize that I was afraid, I was terrified of what I was going to do on my own, because I had been in that family. I had been taken care of at the University of Notre Dame, which their sort of motto was in loco parentis, which means in place of parents. And so when I graduated, I was in free fall, and I met a woman in my spring semester, and we were married by August.
This is something I was going to ask you. A lot of adoptees experience that free fall type of feeling a little bit later, like in the high school, college age, when you're really going, wait, who am I? Did you feel with your parents, because you were saying you didn't feel like them, were they nurturing and loving, or did you feel like your mom maybe knew you weren't hers? Like, is there any sort of looking back?
I think there was a kind of distance, and they didn't presume to tell me what to do, as I said. And I made a lot of good decisions, and I made some bad ones that I'm still suffering with, really. That first marriage led to my first son, who was now 47 and just out of prison. And he spent probably half of his adult life incarcerated in one way or another, county jail or state prison. And is, really imprisoned by, and this is by his own account, he's imprisoned by addiction, which he's fighting. And he's trying to, free himself.
We do talk often. We talked with AM about parenting, actually, like the adoptee.
Parenting as an adopted person, maybe the unconscious way in which we parent, which maybe isn't true for everybody, but I've noticed a common thread.
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife last night or this morning, I can't remember which it was, but and I had said that maybe the mistakes I made with that son was trying to forgive my own birth parents for giving me up by doing the same thing. I would identify with them, which would somehow legitimate what they had done.
Yeah.
I don't know. If so, it's all unconscious, but it does kind of rhyme in some way.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't, once I got out of graduate school, I went right to New York City and ended up like 14 blocks from the New York Foundling. And so I thought, well, let me see what I can find out here. Sent him a letter asking for, background information. And I got a letter from another nun, Sister Phelan, and she said, I can give you background information, but not identifying information. And so I learned first names, a birth date from my mother, how much I weighed, how tall they were, who had blue eyes, who had green eyes, that sort of thing. And that they were from the northeast part of the United States.
That's kind of a lot of information. So people don't even give.
And they were Irish American.
Okay.
So that was somewhat helpful. But when my mother told me that my father was a little upset that I was looking, I dropped it. Dropped it completely for probably 20 years or so, till after they both had passed.
And your mother was not upset you were looking?
No.
I
don't think so.
It's usually the reverse. That's fine.
Is it? Yeah.
Often.
Yeah.
That the mother feels a little bit more because I don't know, but go on.
I don't think she was threatened by it.
But your father was threatened by it.
Yeah, it seemed to be. And he was such a gentle, wonderful soul. I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was, make him uneasy. And they had done well by me, so I had no resentments at all, no grievances to speak of. I was just curious because I was always trying to figure out, claim an identity, either stumble upon it or imagine it. And most of it was imagining.
And therein lies a thread.
Yeah, that's right.
Some of us are still doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, eventually you end up, being who you are, whether you like it or not.
That's right.
But I began to really read about adoption after making some other bad decisions in my life, and I thought I had to sort of explain myself to my wife at the time, and it's like, well, maybe it has something to do with my being adopted.
Had you seen any kind of therapist or gone through marital counseling? Not yet. Okay.
Not yet. But so I remember going to Barnes & Noble bookstore on 17th Street in Manhattan, finding the adoption books, and buying this book by Betty Jean Lifton. I can't remember the title of it.
Journey of the Adopted
Journey of the Adopted Son.
Yes, it's a seminal book, right?
Yes. And you've done a lot on that book, chapter by chapter, I believe. Yes. That really opened me up in some ways to the fact that the adoption experience can be reflected and is reflected in the art making of many people. She talked about Gordon Matta Clark, that I think you mentioned, who was the son of a famous architect from Chile, I think, Robert Matta Clark. And he went to Cornell, he became an artist, and he would chainsaw houses in half.
Yeah.
That was sort of his intervention with an artwork. Betty Jean says, well, there's a divided self here, or a family breach. And although Gordon wasn't adopted, he was sort of intellectually orphaned by his father, who left and went back to South America while Gordon was up at Cornell, I think. Sorry. I tend to drift away here. And she also talked about a New York writer who was living on the Upper West Side, Harold Brodkey, who was kind of infamous in New York for having this novel that he never finished and was paid a lot of money for. He was extremely vain, and he was all over the social scene. And her husband, Robert J. Lifton, Betty Jean's husband, said, and she quotes it in the book, that Brodsky's work is the adoption experience writ large. And so I read everything by Brodkey, and he's an excessive writer. It just goes on and on and on. He has a 50-page story about bringing a woman at Harvard to orgasm. So he can't...
We'll do that in the next season.
Yeah. 50 pages. Slow mover. He could not really find a narrative for anything. And his books would just, circle a point like that. But beautiful, excessively gorgeous prose.
And Betty Jean didn't come into this till she was much older.
Yeah.
By the way, she was in her 50s.
I think that's a common thing. We can talk about that later.
Yeah. And I began to realize that I had been reading, looking for my identity in the things I had been reading, and in fact, was finding something. I didn't quite know what, but by the time I found out who my birth parents were, I was 50, and it turns out they were indeed Irish American. They were from Philadelphia. They were both living in New York, pursuing their dream. My mother went to Catholic University and was on Broadway. And she was actually a lead in a play that closed within a week. But nonetheless, it was a Broadway play. And she was singing in the clubs, in gay clubs, and all kinds of things, and quite a character. And my father was driving cab and drinking at the White Horse Tavern and looking for Dylan Thomas, around town. Then they were friends, and they had a fling, like a one-night stand, this ended up being told. And then they never saw each other again.
And they were alive when you found?
No.
So you had to wait 20 years.
Yeah.
And it was too late by the time.
Too late by the time. But it confirmed a lot of things. I mean, by that time, when I found out that my father worked at the Philadelphia Daily News and was a great James Joyce fan and loved jazz and so on, and that my mother was an artist of a sort. By that time, I had graduated from Notre Dame. I had a degree in Anglo-Irish literature, a master's. I had edited the Irish in America book for Hyperion, which is a Disney imprint. And, I had kind of found my origins in my search for an identity through literature and other things. So that's kind of what is woven into this book of mine. That's why I called it a literary memoir, although in some ways it's an investigation of the relationship between Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright and novelist, and a very good American poet named Susan Howe. They were rumored to be father and daughter. And I thought, well, I can look at their work and I'm going to find evidence of that unease, that dis-ease, that longing somehow, or that hiding. Whether I found it or not remains to be seen or determined by other scholars. But it allowed me to tell that story, and then I just ended up weaving in a lot of my own stories. And as you know, there's a whole lot about
your son.
My son. There's many pages of just text messages back and forth while he's on the run or he's in prison or wherever he might be. And I just thought, he's such an example of an orphaned child in a way. He has no one but me, and I didn't raise him. His mother and I broke up when he was 2.
Where is his mother?
She died in 1989, and she died of hypothermia. She was abusing some kind of narcotic and went out in a cold January rain in Indiana and never made it. Just kind of lay down and fell asleep.
Was he an only? An only child?
No, she had 2 other boys after.
And does he have a relationship with them?
Not much anymore. One of them's died of an overdose.
Okay.
And the other is just working hard up in Wisconsin, but and has a wife but no children.
When we were talking last night, we were talking about relationships, and you touched on this. You're married 4 times, on lucky number 4.
Yeah.
And did your partners, or when you're going through all this with your son, with your marriages, falling in love, different things, did any of this come out in your relationships? Some of the feelings, are you looking on that and thinking, oh, let me connect that at all?
I think my kind of zealous pursuit of my identity has left damage in its wake. Leaving marriages, leaving my younger son, who's now 32, was very painful for him and for me and for my current wife, who suffered along with me as my heart ached for what I had done. But it was to better myself, I thought, and I think it has. I think it was we've been together 25 years, and I think it's we'll be there forever in some fashion. And he's happy now too. So, and just got married last September. So that is all worked out. But I do think I hurt some people along the way, and my first son has hurt some people as well that I'm ultimately responsible for, I guess. So I made the decisions to go ahead with that marriage and that fatherhood.
You said something about hitting 50, and this is what we have discovered is getting to that age and feeling maybe, as Steve Jobs said, connecting the dots backwards, right? You get to this place and you're like, why am I still doing these things or feeling these things? And then that's when that search starts, or the search for self, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may have a search and find family or whatever, but your internal is still a search. Mm-hmm. Or do we ever stop searching?
I hope I have. But it's true that now in retrospect, that those marriages were all in a way looking for other families to be part of.
Yeah, that's
the first one was a Hispanic Chicano family, and I just thought it was, they were so dignified, and it was just, somehow I just felt I was doing the right thing, become part of this big family in the barrio in Indiana. Another marriage was to a woman I think who I thought could probably help me in some way. She was always meddling with what other people were doing, and I thought maybe she could apply that to me in some sense. I can't believe this is being public, but and then my third marriage was also sort of brought with it a sort of prominent artist-like family, as has my last marriage, my final marriage. So, and I don't like to be alone. As soon as those some beer shows, I don't like going home alone. Fix this, and not just casual, but really, all.
Well, you said when we started this podcast that your parents letting you do your own thing was a good thing, but now I'm hearing that you kept seeking family. So yeah, there's a dot to maybe connect, right?
Yeah. I some of this reading of Samuel Beckett has led me down a many and a half way, but one is that he spent 2.5 years in Therapy with the guidance of Wilfred Beale, who studied Melody Coffey. And although it was early in Beale's career, it's quite well known now for history books. I think Beckett was his first patient. He has developed this idea of containment, that in childhood development, there's a point in which the child, in restable circumstances, must feel contained, must feel that there's something protecting him, her.
Safe.
Yeah, safe. And to reading more about what Beyond was saying, it's some of Melody Coffey, I think something may have happened early on where I did not feel contained. I do know my mother has told me that the nuns, sent me into that family with an improper formula. They would prescribe formula for the child. And so I was losing weight terribly for like the first 2 or 3 months. But I would say something in that first 5 or 6 weeks may have, scared the hell out of me in some way. And I'm, of course, a child, and I can't even image it to myself. I can't remember it. I had no language to start to define it with. And
It's pre-verbal trauma, really.
Yeah.
And the body keeps the score. I'm sure it's shown up in ways that maybe you're not aware of, or.
Yeah, I'm sure I still have a lot to learn.
You mentioned being so public and seeing these things. We've gotten kind of used to it, putting like everything out there that maybe we don't want to put out there, and then we're like, yeah. But
On national radio the other day.
But thank you for doing that, because it is, everyone here has, many people have come out with their stories, but so many people will hear this podcast and down the line haven't. Mm-hmm. And your story, like you saying these things, maybe somebody goes, okay, well, let me look at that. Like he was brave about it, because it is kind of, or at a certain age, it's like, okay, what is the deal, right?
Yeah. We have to live with our mistakes and understand why they happened, if you can. Betty Jean Lifton was somewhat helpful, I have to say. I saw her maybe for a year.
Oh, you went to her?
Yeah, I went to her.
That's pretty big.
Yeah.
We didn't know this. Tell us about this.
She and Robert J. Lifton had some really beautiful apartment on the Central Park West, and she was a bit of a brusque person, and you would meet in her sort of a foyer, the first as you walked in this beautiful apartment, and she insisted on having her dog there, whose name was Basket, and Basket would
we like to have our dogs.
Yeah, it's also the name of Gertrude Stein's dog, I learned. And the dog would bark through the whole thing. And I thought, Betty Jean, you need some help.
Physician, heal thyself.
Yeah. But, she just kind of brought me out and made me talk about what senses of alienation and loneliness I had and why it might be there. But we didn't get, that far into it. She insisted she was taking the summer in Cape Cod, and I had to do it by phone, and I didn't want to do that. No. I remember. So.
And what you were talking about with your son, that's what interests us sometimes too. That's what we talk to AM about. Like, what is if you don't know your issues, what are you passing down as a parent as well? Yeah. And is there remembered
trauma?
Yeah, and remembered trauma too. Mm-hmm. We just read an incredible article about that in the New York Times. But I just wondered at your experience with therapy and all of that.
Yeah, no, I do often wonder, how much trauma I've passed on, sort of suppressed but handed on, which makes you feel terrible to think about. Yeah. But
well, you can just go forward now, right? And knowing what you know and do what you do.
Eamon said it earlier. You don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, yeah.
But I think I've learned a lot, and I'm a different person now than I was, 40 years ago. Yeah. I like to think. I wouldn't make the same mistakes now that I made then, and just live more responsibly and try to help my sons when I can.
Well, we're glad you joined the adoptee community.
We are. We weren't so sure after New York when you came in that night. Like, uh-oh.
Yeah. And
like, AM was like, look for Michael. There he goes.
Really? I guess I made quite an impression.
Do you want to read something from your book? I'm sure people would love that if you'd be willing to.
Sure. I will do that.
And give a little context, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the main drive in this book was realizing that I had been searching for myself in books and in signs from various things since I could remember. When the pandemic started, my wife and I fled New York City, and we stopped at a bookstore in Saratoga. I had had the mail forwarded for 2 weeks. I thought, this is going to pass quickly. And I bought a nice little copy of T.S. Eliot's 4 Quartets. They're 4 beautiful poems. And in it, I read this line in one of the 4 poems. "Go," said the bird, "for the leaves were full of children." And I realized that as I start the book, I've been looking in the leaves and listening in the leaves since I came of age, looking and listening for traces, voices, ghosts of lost birth parents, lost siblings or half-siblings, for an extrusion of a family wholly out of sight, earshot and mind, extrusions into the fabric of the visible and the heard, read on printed pages. And this is a little bit of a play on Beckett's Waiting for Godot. All the dead voices, are they dead? A noise like wings, no like leaves, no like sand, no like leaves. They whisper, they rustle, they murmur, they rustle. They talk about their lives, says Vladimir from Waiting for Godot. They may be dead. Are they dead? And still they have to talk about it. But do we listen?
It's beautiful.
So I go on to talk about, write about the present. There's a lot of going in and out of, reflection and observation, I guess you could say. So I'll just read a paragraph of that sort. Let's do the weather then, here and now. And as always, I will try to catch up to the here and now. I'll start with color. White where white is, downslope and trees. This is a view from my study in upstate New York. The birches far below a lake. Must be winter where I am from, or late fall. From where I sit, more the promise of a lake than a sighting hides below. None of the lake views that thrill the insurgent newcomers. We're old, aren't we? Gray the sky, vaulting down in sympathy with the slope. What's the phrase for a limb riding on another's limb? A kind of sistering, as timbers are sistered? The road outside my window, my picture window, soot black the pavement, the black of black maples that form a kind of LA, and the pale green on the trunks, lichen, I think, or moss, and the branchwork bare and straining now for the sky to notice, the sky which is falling now, amidst strophes of bruised light. Yes to sistering. Language, I am trying to say, as a lifeline, hand over hand. This line you grab and pull hand over hand. You follow it in the dark. Here's the dark, for dear life it must end somewhere. But its linearity is all the sense we have, so follow it, hand over hand. It has its intricacies, its braided strength, like a rope, when we move along it. I, we, you, whoever. It is sinuous, I'll grant that. We move around corners, uphill and downhill, away, following the lifeline of language. So, I sort of followed the
So beautiful, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's haunting. I mean, it is searching.
Mm-hmm. And, in reading some of the great books that sort of came into my attention, like James Joyce's Ulysses, I've read it 4 or 5 times, and there are lessons to be learned in great books. That's why they remain. And one of the things I learned from that book was that you can't always get a resolution and a reconciliation in life. Like I was trying to reconcile myself with my first son, and I kept waiting for something to change and things were going to get better, and I was putting off certain projects in hopes that it would get better. And I realized that what Joyce did in Ulysses was saying, you can't wait for, Leopold Bloom to adopt Stephen Dedalus in the book. He has to have, but he will have an aesthetic resolution to it. He will find a way to end the story in a way that doesn't bring father and son together, but is successful artistically, and ends in a great affirmation where Molly is going at the end saying, yes, yes, yes. So that was a very important life lesson for me, to not just insist that somehow, things are going to all be better, and to be miserable until that day comes, rather than find a way to incorporate disappointment or reality into your life, and accept what is and fall in love with what is. So
we talk about also, in conclusion with that, just you can be in both worlds and not be in either world fully. And that's what that reminds me of a little bit, just your words.
That splitting in half that you started the, not necessarily truly belonging anywhere, right?
Yeah. It's what Betty Jean Lifton called the ghost kingdom.
The ghost kingdom.
Which was a powerful concept when I first read across it.
That for me too.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
These people wandering through.
Do you want to explain that in case there are people here that don't know what that is?
Well, the ghost kingdom is, it's quite crowded with, the birth mother wondering where the ghost of their child is. The birth father, similarly. The adoptive parents wondering what family they might have had. The mother and the father. The child, the adoptee, wondering, are there siblings out there, half-siblings?
Where's my mother?
Where's my mother? Where's my father? Where's their uncles? Where's everything else, But it's not an absence. It's for an active imagination. It is a peopled kingdom of possibilities, which are, both harrowing to consider, but also you feed off of it in some way. Because you could always be something you don't quite know yet. So you are your own mystery, which is.
And as a young child, it helps you make sense of your world.
Yeah.
In a way. When you're feeling uncomfortable, it's a place to go. And
yeah, I can remember I used to walk to my job at Publishers Weekly, walk up 7th Avenue, and there was a woman who stopped me there, and she said, you must have a brother in this neighborhood. There's someone who looks just like you. And I said, really? And don't you know, my eyes were peeled for this guy for 2 or 3 years.
Sure. Yeah.
But I never saw him. But I was, momentarily
You don't even know
convinced.
you're looking, because I've had the similar experience. I saw a girl on my college campus once, and everyone kept mistaking me for her. She was there for a summer camp, but I looked and looked find her again. And I didn't even know, I could, every day I just scan and look. And
Actually, could have been your sister.
it could have been. We actually know now it could have been looking back, but at the time I wasn't even in conversation about this, right?
Yeah.
So you're not telling friends, you're keeping it in. It's very, you didn't read The Primal Wound, I don't think, but in The Primal Wound.
Nancy Very.
Yeah, Nancy Very, she talks about that adoptees are always searching, even if you're not searching.
Mm-hmm.
And your writing speaks to that too.
Yeah. And I looked around a lot, and you go into, I'd hear a name and I think, maybe that's the name I had. The story of how I found out who I am is kind of complicated, but it involves the New York Public Library. They have a genealogy room, and I was like struggling in there, and there was a Southern lady, she had a Southern accent, who came over and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I was adopted in New York City." And she said, "Well, what year?" And I said, 1954. She said, "Well, you're in one of those 2 volumes." And I said, "But I don't have my original birth certificate. I don't, it was not given. I have an amended birth certificate, but it doesn't tell me where I came from." And so she said, "Well, there's a number on your amended birth certificate, and it's the same number that's on your original birth certificate. They transfer that. So here's the 2 volumes. It's in there somewhere."
We learned that from somebody. Who was it? Megan?
We had another guest that Megan. Yeah.
Colleen Galbraith, another author, but she spent hours looking for that number, days.
Yeah, unfortunately, my birthday is 11/11. So in the column of birth date, 4 ones just leapt out at you. And fortunately, I was in the B's.
I think she was not. She was way down there.
So boom, there it was. My name was Mark Bradley. Mark Bradley. My mother had said, my adopted mother, that my name might be Mark, but she said, they may have named you after a saint or something, the nuns. And who knows who Bradley was. So, but when I found a private detective or something who had the license to kind of get in some federal files or whatever, he said, "What kind of information do you have?" And I said, "Well, I have this background information, which gives my mother's first name, it seems, and her birth date." And then I said, I had this search in the New York Public Library that says I might be named Bradley. And it took him like 2 days, and he found my birth mother's family.
Oh, that's a question. Did you have a relationship with anybody in that family since they were deceased? Did you reach out to?
I have, yes. My wife and I drove down to Frederick, Maryland to see my, I guess, half-sister? I'm not sure what to call her.
A half-sister.
Yeah. But she was adopted.
Oh, she's adopted.
Wait,
explain.
she was adopted out, so she's not a biological relative?
She's not, my birth mother had only me as a natural birth.
Okay.
She went on to adopt 3 children, I learned. All of whom seemed kind of unhappy, but I'm not sure. We only saw them once or twice.
Well, you don't have any relation to them, right?
No, I don't. The only thing I shared with them is being adopted, ironically enough.
Put them in touch with us. We'll put them on the phone.
The last thing I thought I would have in common with my siblings was that.
So you've never taken a DNA test to find out anything from your father's side?
Well, that half-sister, we'll call her, I said, "Well, I don't know who the father is." She said, "Well, call this woman in New York. She was Mom's dear friend." And they palled around together. They shared an apartment when they were single gals in New York on 72nd Street, I think. And they were both in summer stock theater, and they were on the town quite a bit. And she said to call her. She gave me her phone number. She said, "But don't call her after 5," she said. Which I didn't know quite what that meant, but I think subsequently I met her. I think it meant she kind of liked her for 4 roses or whatever. So I called her and I said, explained who I was. She said, I've always wondered, where you were. And I said, Maureen gave me your number, the half-sister. And I said, do you know who my father is? She says, yes, Bobby Gallagher. I was engaged to him. But they just...
Is that in their friendship?
She ended the relationship at some point. She said she went to Canada on a summer stock and fell in love with some guy in Canada and thought, if I'm in love with this guy in Canada, how can I be engaged to this guy from Philadelphia?
He was a cab driver.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So he was the cab driver, and she said they just had a one-night fling, passion. And yeah. And so I was the result. But, it was a very hush-hush pregnancy. No one, only my birth mother's one sister, my Aunt Anne, knew about me because Ginny, did her last couple of months of confinement in her sister's house in White.
As I say, there's somewhere she went because to hide it. Yeah.
Yeah. She went up there and they had a room for her and she never came down. And it was, in Catholic sin.
Yeah.
It was unfolding.
It's a very punishing era, the baby scoop era.
Yeah. And I was told, because I met a lot of subsequent people in the family, that the theory was that the 3 adoptions she subsequently had were sort of guilted on her by a priest, who held over her that she had given up a child. So it was her duty to rescue others.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But she never forgot me, apparently. When she was on her deathbed, one of the nurses said to the sisters, she keeps saying, my baby son, my baby son.
Oh. Birth mothers don't forget. We've met many over the years. Yeah.
So that was...
It's a defining moment that changes their life.
Yeah.
Mainly for the worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how happy her life was. They went to Ireland a lot, and her husband was a really silent, big guy who liked to play with his toy soldiers in his study and things like that.
And you were saying, her adopted children maybe weren't that happy, but we say this because we've had lots of people say, well, I was better off because I've met my birth mother. But we don't know because that's a trauma they're suffering too. How she parented or would have been different if you had stayed with her, right? And so she might have been a hands-off parent or not the best parent or a different, we don't know, but I'm just saying that's a whole nother thing that goes with this.
And Bobby Gallagher, my father's side, they had 4 children, and I met all of them. One has died since of a drug overdose. One has Down syndrome and is in an institution of some sort. And the other 2 I know quite well, especially my sister Lizanne. We talk quite a bit.
Did you, now that you have found those siblings, do you feel a kinship with them, like more belonging maybe? I mean, there's the issues, but like obviously you don't have the shared history, right? So you have these biological relatives with no shared history, yet you look alike, or you...
Yeah, I really don't look like them much. And if anything, I feel a little guilty for around them because I feel like I had such a better life than they did. I was able to go to a good private college. I didn't have a lot of competition in the household. I was, treated very well, and they've had to really struggle. And their mother was had issues where they had to be farmed out to other homes for a while. A lot of damage was done then, I think. But they're struggling quite a bit, but surviving. And
there's a lot of that around you, huh?
I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting it.
No.
But I mean to get in touch with Lizanne again and send her a copy of the book, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because,
Well, thank you, Michael. This has been...
I know.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming and for telling your story and being vulnerable and truthful. And
Thank you for all you're doing. You know, hearing the stories is important to people, I think. I mean, I didn't really know any adoptees when I was in my
That's
crucial
sad.
years.
Yeah.
So now I know a lot.
Now you have a lot of us.
now you have a community.
Thank you.
Thank you.